At 9:02 on a gray Tuesday morning, in Courtroom 4 of the Fairfax County Circuit Court, a judge stopped reading in the middle of a sentence, and the most expensive lawyer in Alexandria forgot how to breathe. I watched it happen from the defendant's table. Judge Evelyn Marsh had a single sheet of paper in her hand. Not the 42-page petition. Not the binders that Sterling Vance's paralegals had wheeled in on a cart like a catered lunch. One sheet. She read it once. Then she took off her glasses, cleaned them, put them back on, and read it again. Across the aisle. Vance was writing a note to his co-counsel with a fountain pen that cost more than my first car. The pen stopped mid-word. I remember the sound it made when it rolled off the table onto the carpet, a soft, expensive little thud because nobody bent down to pick it up. My mother-in-law leaned toward her lawyer and whispered, loud enough for the second row to hear, "What is she reading? What does that paper say?" Vivian Ross had spent 9 weeks telling everyone in 2 counties exactly how this hearing would go. She had a designer suit for it. She had a victory lunch reserved for it. She had not planned for that sheet of paper. Here's what you need to understand. I did not object when the judge picked it up. I did not say a word. 30 years of silence had led to this room, and I was not going to break that silence 1 minute early. My heart rate, if you're wondering, was 62. I counted it against the courtroom clock, the way I was trained to. But before I tell you what was on that paper and why my husband's mother went home that afternoon with something in her purse she was too proud to open, you have to back up 9 weeks. To a rainy morning at Arlington National Cemetery, where I buried my husband of 30 years, and where his mother declared war over his grave. My name is Katherine Ross. I'm 61 years old, and for most of my adult life, when people asked me what I did, I gave them the same answer. I did paperwork for the Army. That was true. It was just not the whole truth. Keep that in mind. It matters later. My husband, Colonel Raymond Ross, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, retired, died in September on a Sunday afternoon, in the garage workshop he loved, with a half-rebuilt carburetor on the bench and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. A stroke. The doctors said it was fast. They say that to widows the way you'd hand somebody a coat because it's the only warm thing available. They buried him at Arlington with full honors on a morning so gray the headstones in the sky were the same color. A young sergeant handed me the folded flag on behalf of the President of the United States, the United States Army, and a grateful nation, and I received it with both hands. Because 30 years around soldiers teaches you that you receive anything that matters with both hands. The rifle volleys had barely faded when Vivian Ross appeared at my shoulder. My mother-in-law was 84 and walked through Arlington like the place had been built and was being maintained for her personal inspection. She was the widow of Major General Harold Ross. She had spent her whole life as the wife of a rank, and then the mother of a rank. And she wore the pearls Harold gave her the day he pinned on his stars the way other people wear dog tags. In 30 years of family dinners, I never once saw her stand in a line. She stopped beside me, eyes on the grave, and said quietly, so only I could hear, "That house was Ross money. That company was my son's sweat. I'll be taking both back. Katherine, you should get yourself a lawyer." A pause, small and precise as a paper cut. "Oh, but I don't suppose you'd know where to find one. Would you, dear?" I stood there holding my husband's flag. And I want to be honest with you about what went through my head. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief, even. It was one sentence, marching around my skull in step. She's right about one thing. All I've ever done is paperwork. She just never asked, not once. In 30 years, what kind? The reception was at our house on Cedar Hollow Lane. The house Raymond and I paid off over 22 years. The house with the third porch step that squeaks. Because Raymond refused to fix it for 2 decades, so I know the second you're home. He'd say every single time I brought it up, until I stopped bringing it up because I'd started to love the sound. The house was full. Engineers Raymond had served with. Neighbors with casseroles. And the crew from Ross Gage and Tool, the company he built in Manassas. 40 employees. 19 of them veterans. Machining and calibrating precision measurement instruments for defense contractors. Not glamorous work. Raymond used to say America runs on the parts nobody photographs. Vivian waited until the living room was at its fullest. Then she tapped a silver spoon against her teacup, and the room went quiet the way rooms always went quiet for her. "Thank you all for honoring my son," she said. "Raymond was a Ross, and I intend to personally see to it that his legacy, this house, his company, returns to where it belongs. I spoke with my attorney this morning. 40 pairs of eyes found me. I was standing by the coffee table holding somebody's empty plate. Diane Raymond's younger sister, 58 years old and a lifetime of translating between her mother and the rest of the human race, stared at the floor. Earl Jensen, Raymond's shop foreman, a former sergeant first class with hands like catcher's mitts, came up out of his chair and I gave him a small shake of the head. The kind of head shake I'd used in other rooms, in another life, when somebody was about to say something that would end up on a transcript. Then I set down the plate, looked at my mother-in-law, and said to her and to the whole breath-held room, "You're right, Vivian. Raymond was a Ross, and everything he built is going to end up exactly where it belongs. I promise you that." She blinked. She had come loaded for tears, for a scene, for a widow unraveling in front of witnesses. She had not prepared for agreement. That was her first mistake. She heard surrender. Anyone who had ever sat across from me in a room with a flag and a witness stand would have heard something else entirely. They would have heard an oath. But none of those people were in my living room. So by sundown, all of Fairfax had reached the same verdict. Poor Katherine Ross, the quiet wife who did paperwork at the base, had given up without a fight. That night, after the last casserole dish was washed, I went into the study, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and took out a green legal pad, the kind I'd been writing on for a quarter of a century, in a place nobody in my husband's family ever asked about. On the first line, in block letters, I wrote, "Matter, estate of Raymond Ross. Expected petitioner, Vivian Ross. Action item 1, do not move first. Let them commit on paper." 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the house. The return address, printed in the corner, meant nothing to my neighbors and everything to me. Virginia State Bar Membership Department. I read the letter twice, folded it, and filed it in the green folder. 9 weeks to go. I should tell you 3 things Fairfax didn't know. The town knew a version of me. Every small town does that. It laminates you early and files you away. Thing 1. I met Raymond in 1994 at a defense contracting conference at Fort Belvoir. He was a major presenting on measurement standards. I was the woman in the second row who raised her hand and pointed out 3 legal holes in his presentation. He asked me to coffee to finish the argument. We finished it over the next 30 years, and I never once stopped being grateful for those 3 holes. Thing 2. When Raymond brought me home to Richmond to meet his mother, Vivian asked me exactly one question about myself. The question was, "And what does your family do?" I told her my father was an electrician in Ohio. She set down her teacup, and for the next 30 years, she never asked me another question. Not what I did in the army. Not why there were years I was gone for 6 months at a stretch. Not why the ribbons on my dress uniform said what they said, and the widow of a 2-star general could read every one of them, if she'd ever bothered to look. To Vivian, I was an electrician's daughter, and everything after that was footnotes. There's a third thing, but good evidence gets introduced at the right moment, and we're not there yet. What I will tell you now is the part that still costs me something to say out loud. In the first 2 years of our marriage, Raymond wrote to his mother every month, and for 2 years, those letters came back unopened. She was punishing him for marrying beneath the Ross name, for choosing me. He never told me how much it hurt. I found out anyway, the way wives do, and I made a decision, quietly at 29 years old, that I would never give that woman one more reason to reject her son. If she needed me small, I would be small. I filed my whole self away in a drawer and labeled it paperwork. And I told myself, for 30 years, that this was love. I'm no longer sure it was. But we'll get to that. The petition was served on a Thursday, 16 days after the funeral. 42 pages, Signed by Sterling Vance of Vance & Crowe. Alexandria, the kind of firm with marble in the lobby and billing software that thinks in 6-minute increments. I read it at my kitchen table with a pot of tea, the way you'd grade a bright student's paper. The petition had 2 blades to it. Blade 1, a challenge to Raymond's will, alleging that my husband, physically diminished following major cardiac surgery in 2017, had been subjected to undue influence by his wife, a woman who controlled every document in the household. Blade 2 was the one that made my hand tighten on the page until the paper creased. Vance alleged that I had systematically isolated the decedent from his blood family in his final years. Isolated him from his mother. They didn't know about the drives to Richmond. Every month. For 8 years. Nobody knew. I sat very still for a moment. Then I smoothed the crease out of the page, picked up my pencil, and wrote in the margin, in block letters, rebuttal, item 4 hold. Courtroom only. Some evidence you spend early. Some evidence you save for when it will land on a hard floor. Tessa Bloom came over that evening with chicken soup and the face of a woman who'd heard everything at the pharmacy. Tessa teaches piano 3 doors down and is training, at 58, for her first marathon, which tells you everything about how she approaches other people's problems. Okay. Who are you hiring? She said before the soup hit the counter. My cousin used a firm in Arlington for her divorce. They were sharks. I can get the number tonight. I'm not hiring anyone. Tessa stopped. Katherine. People are saying Vivian hired the most expensive firm in Alexandria. Second most expensive, I said. The most expensive one turned her down. Conflict of interest with a defense contractor, I'd imagine. How could you possibly know that? I poured her tea. I hear things. She studied me for a long moment, and the pity in her face was worse than anything Vivian had said at the funeral. I know you're grieving. But this is your house. You can't walk into a courtroom alone against a man like that. The truth got as far as my teeth. Then I thought about what Raymond used to say when people asked why he never talked about the medals in his sock drawer. Telling people beforehand is bragging. Doing it first and telling them after, that's just a report. I'll be in that courtroom, I said. And I won't be alone. I'll have 30 years of Raymond with me. Tessa left looking like she'd visited a patient who was refusing treatment. By Sunday, the town had its story straight. The widow Ross was so broken by grief she wouldn't even hire a lawyer. At the grocery store, people had started talking about me in the past tense. Only one person didn't buy it. Earl Jensen drove in from Manassas that Sunday night, still in his shop jacket. He sat down at my kitchen table, wrapped both catcher's mitt hands around a coffee mug, and delivered his report the way a sergeant first class delivers everything numbered. Ma'am. 2 items. Item 1, Friday morning, Mrs. Ross came to the shop. Had a man with her. Suit, business card, said Hargrove Industrial. They walked the floor. Measured things. She introduced herself to the crew as the future owner and said Hargrove was, quote, very interested in an acquisition. I set the kettle down slowly. Hargrove Industrial. Raymond turned down their buyout offers 3 separate times because all 3 times. Their plan opened with shutting the Manassas floor and moving the line overseas. How's the crew taking it? Scared, ma'am. Earl didn't decorate things. 19 of ours are vets. Half the floor is north of 50. If Hargrove buys, those men don't get hired anywhere else. But that's not the bad item. Give me item 2. He laid a folder on the table. The framework contract with our prime, the one that 60% of our revenue comes up for its 5-year renewal. Renewal package needs the signature of an owner with clear legal authority, filed by November 30th. We miss the window. The contract rolls to open rebid. And ma'am, he turned the coffee mug a quarter turn. Hargrove is already lined up at that rebid like it's Black Friday. I looked at the calendar by the pantry. October 6th. 55 days. 40 jobs. And now I could see the whole architecture of Vance's petition. Clean as a blueprint. It wasn't built to win fast. It was built to last. As long as ownership of the company sat inside a live dispute past November 30th, nobody on earth had authority to sign that renewal. The company loses its anchor contract. the valuation drops through the floor. And Hargrove buys the wreckage at a discount whether Vivian ever wins a single motion or not. She didn't need to beat me. She just needed me slow. "Earl," I said, "tell the crew to keep making parts." Payroll clears. The renewal gets signed before the deadline. He looked at me for a long time. Earl had stood next to Raymond for 20 years, and I could see him weighing whether to say what the whole town was saying. "Signed with what authority, ma'am?" Instead, he stood up, put his heels together, and gave me one short nod, the kind you give an officer before a mission you don't fully understand but intend to complete anyway. "Copy that, ma'am." To this day, I don't know how much Earl had figured out. But that old sergeant was the first person in Fairfax County who looked at me and didn't see a widow waiting to lose. Vance moved fast after that. He filed for a temporary restraining order freezing all signing authority at Ross Gage and Toole pending resolution of ownership, and a judge granted it on an emergency basis, the way judges often do when only one side has shown up loaded. The clock over the pantry got louder every day. And then came the deposition. They rented a conference room with a view of the Potomac for it. Vance sat across from me with a court reporter, 2 associates, and that fountain pen. And for 3 hours he tried to walk me into sentences I would later have to eat. I answered every question the way you'd hand someone a folded flag. Slowly, with both hands. At one point, an associate slid a stack of exhibits across the table, and I said, without thinking, "Counsel, your Exhibit 12 is marked as the 2019 codicil, but the document attached is the 2017 deed. You may want to fix the tabs before you file." The room went quiet for half a second. Vance smiled the way expensive men smile at church bake sale ladies. "Somebody's been watching a lot of courtroom dramas," he said. He capped his fountain pen as he said it, a small, satisfied click, the sound of a man filing me under harmless. I looked at him, and I gave him the one sentence I allowed myself in 9 weeks. "I've seen a few." He chuckled and moved on. He actually moved on. 29 years of practice, $700 an hour, and it never once occurred to him to run a bar search on the quiet widow who did paperwork at the base. Why would he? Vivian had briefed him thoroughly on who I was. She'd had 30 years to get it wrong. Here's the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you I never wavered. That's not how it went. The night the restraining order came down, Diane called. Raymond's sister has spent her whole life beginning sentences with Mom just, and this call was no different. Mom just wants to feel like she still matters, Kath. She told me if you sign over the company, she'll drop everything else. You keep the house. Everyone keeps the peace. Please. I can't referee this family alone anymore. And God help me. I sat there with the phone against my ear and I did the math. Sign 1 page. The lawsuit dies. 40 jobs well. Vivian would sell to Hargrove within a year. We both know how that math ends. But the noise would stop. 30 years of training in one discipline keep the peace. Stay small. Protect Raymond from his own mother, and that discipline was pulling at me like a tide. "Let me think," I said and hung up, and hated myself for saying it. I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m, I went to the hall closet to find Raymond's boot polish. I'd been shining his old jump boots at night, which makes no sense. Nobody was ever going to wear them again, and I'm telling you about it anyway because grief doesn't itemize. And on the top shelf behind the polish kit, my hand found a tin box. It was an old Danish cookie tin, taped shut, and on the lid, in Raymond's draftsman handwriting, 2 words. Mom never sent. I sat down on the closet floor at 1 a.m. and I opened it. 347 letters. 1 a month. Near enough. For 30 years. The first one's from 1996, back when she was returning his mail unopened. The last one dated 11 days before he died. He'd kept writing her every month. For 30 years, and after those first 2 years of returned envelopes, he never risked mailing another one. He just wrote them, and folded them, and put them in a cookie tin, because that was the only version of his mother that would take his calls. I read 4 of them. Then I closed the tin, because a person can only carry so much at 1 a.m. But but I want to tell you the line that ended the argument I'd been having with myself since Diane called. It was in a letter from 2003, after some Thanksgiving slight I don't even remember. Raymond wrote, "Mom, you keep waiting for Katherine to prove she's worthy of this family. One day you're going to find out it was the other way around, and I hope I'm in the room when you do." I sat on the closet floor and I understood two things with total clarity. One, I was not signing anything. Two, he was not going to be in the room. So I would have to be in it for both of us. I called Diane back at 7 a.m. "Tell your mother I'll see her on the 24th, I said. Then I went into the study, took out 19 years of records and 9 weeks of green legal pads, and started building exhibit binders. The letter from the Virginia State Bar was already in the folder. Status of membership active. At 9 that evening, the phone rang. Bennett Cho I knew before I picked up, because only one man on earth calls at 9 sharp, out of 30 years of habit. "Good evening, Colonel." "I'm retired, Bennett." "Retired," he agreed, in the tone of a man agreeing to nothing. "The binder's ready. Tabbed twice." A pause. "And the provision he asked us to keep quiet, it stands as written." I looked at the green folder on the desk. Article 7 stands exactly as written. "Then get some sleep, Colonel," Bennett said, and hung up before I could correct him again. November 24th. Courtroom 4, Fairfax County Circuit Court. Which brings us back to 9:02 a.m. and the sheet of paper. But let me set the room first, because the room matters. Behind the petitioner's table, Vivian in a cream suit and the general's pearls, flanked by Vance, 2 associates, and a document cart. Behind her, Diane folded into herself like a returned letter. Behind the defense table, me alone, with 3 exhibit binders I had tabbed myself. In the gallery, Earl and 11 men from the Manassas floor who had taken the morning off without being asked. Tessa with a thermos. And half the neighborhood, because Fairfax may talk about you in the past tense, but it will absolutely show up to watch the funeral. 6 days remained on the contract clock. Vance opened the way expensive lawyers open unhurried. Warm, a man narrating a documentary about a foregone conclusion. He spoke of bloodlines and legacy. He spoke of a diminished, isolated colonel. He spoke of a household where one person controlled every document, and he said the word housewife with a small pause before it, like setting down a teacup. It was, I'll say it plainly, excellent work. Then Judge Evelyn Marsh looked over her glasses at the defense table. "Mrs. Ross, before we proceed, you are appearing without counsel. The court is obligated to confirm that you understand the risks of self-representation in a matter of this complexity." "I understand the risks, Your Honor," I said. Vance rose, gently the way you rise to help an elderly stranger with a suitcase. "Your Honor, petitioner has no objection, but in fairness to Mrs. Ross, this is a complex probate action. Perhaps the court might urge her to seek qualified counsel," the judge said. I wasn't finished. She turned to her clerk. "The defendant filed a notice of appearance last week. Do we have the attached bar certification?" The clerk handed up a single sheet of paper. "That sheet of paper." Judge Marsh read it once, took off her glasses, cleaned them, read it again, and then she read it aloud, into the record, in the flat administrative tone that judges reserve for the most interesting moments of their careers. Katherine Marie Ross, member in good standing, Virginia State Bar, admitted 1,991. Status, active. She paused. Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, Judge Advocate General's Corps, retired. Formerly Chief Trial Counsel. The certification notes participation in over 300 courts-martial. She set the sheet down and looked at Vance over her glasses. "Counsel, I believe the defendant has located a lawyer. I told you about the fountain pen." It stopped mid-word, and then it rolled, and nobody picked it up. The gallery did not gasp exactly. It inhaled 40 people at once, one long pull of air, and then a silence so complete I could hear the radiator ticking. Earl, in the third row, slowly folded his arms, and the expression on his face was not surprise. It was a man confirming a map he'd already drawn. Vivian turned to look at me. Really look for the first time, I think in 30 years. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then her legs simply resigned, and she sat down without deciding to, one hand finding the rail like a woman stepping off a boat. I did not smile. You don't smile at that moment. I had waited 30 years for that moment, and I am telling you, when it finally comes, it doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like setting down something heavy that you'd forgotten you were carrying. Because you'd been carrying it so long, it had started to feel like your own body. Your Honor, I said, the defense is ready. What happened over the next 90 minutes was not a battle. A battle requires two prepared armies. It was an audit. Item 1. I moved to dismiss the asset claims outright and handed up certified copies. In June of 2017, 3 weeks before his cardiac surgery, Raymond Ross transferred the house on Cedar Hollow Lane and 100% of Ross Gage and Tool into the Ross Family Trust, properly executed, properly recorded, sitting in the Fairfax County land records for 9 years. Available to anyone who spent $11 on a title search. The estate Vivian was suing did not contain the things she was suing for. Vance's 42 pages were aimed at an empty room. Vance recovered fast. He was expensive for a reason. Your Honor, if Mrs. Ross drafted that trust herself. That is the undue influence. A wife with legal training, drafting the instrument that benefits her. I anticipated counsel's concern, I said. 9 years ago. Item 2. The trust had been reviewed, revised, and executed through independent counsel Bennett Cho, formerly of the JAG Corps, now in private practice, whose sworn affidavit was Exhibit 6. And because my husband was an engineer who documented everything the way other men breathe, Exhibit 7 was a video. The bailiff wheeled in a screen, and Raymond Ross came into that courtroom one last time, flannel shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, sitting in Bennett's office in 2017, 6 days before they opened his chest. My name is Raymond Ross, he said. I'm of sound mind, which my cardiologist put in writing this morning because I asked him to. I'm making these arrangements freely. Nobody has pressured me. A pause. That grin. For the record, in 30 years my wife has never once made me do anything I didn't want to do. Except eat vegetables. The gallery laughed, that wet, broken laugh of a room full of people who knew him. In the front row, Diane pressed her hand over her mouth. Vivian stared at the screen the way you stare at a door you know will never open again. Item 3 was the one I had saved. The isolation claim. I called Vivian Ross to the stand. Vance objected. The judge allowed it. And I want you to know I kept my voice gentle the whole way through. Because there are things you do for a hostile witness and things you do for your husband's mother. And I was doing both. Mrs. Ross. When did you last visit your son's company? A pause. I don't recall. Would it surprise you that the visitor log says 12 years? I was busy. I had obligations. What does the company make, Mrs. Ross? Silence. Somewhere in the gallery, a chair creaked. She looked at Vance. Vance looked at his legal pad. Tools, she said finally. Machine. Tools. Precision measurement instruments, I said. 40 employees. 19 veterans. Your son knew every name. I let that sit, then opened the third binder. Exhibit 11. 96 toll transponder records. 1 per month. 8 years. My car Fairfax to Richmond and back. Can you tell the court what those trips were? Her hands had found each other in her lap. Raymond visited me. My son drove. After his 2017 surgery, your son was restricted from long-distance driving. Who drove him to Richmond every month for 8 years, Mrs. Ross? The courtroom had gone very still. She looked at her hands. You did, she said. Quietly. One more question. And here my voice did something I hadn't planned. It dropped. And it stopped being a lawyer's voice. Every one of those visits, I stayed outside in the car. 2 hours. In summer. In January. 96 times. Would you tell the court why I waited in the car? The silence stretched 5 seconds. 10. Vance did not object. I think even he wanted the answer. Because I told my son, Vivian said, to her hands. in a voice like paper, that his wife was not welcome in my home. Nobody moved. The radiator ticked. In the gallery, very softly, Diane began to cry. No further questions. Your Honor. I could have stopped there. The case was already dead. But there was one more item, and it was not for the court. It was for her. Your Honor, one final exhibit, with the court's indulgence. Article 7 of the Ross Family Trust. I read it into the record slowly. Upon the death of Raymond Ross, the trust shall provide Vivian Ross, during her lifetime, a monthly distribution of $3,500, together with a designated fund for her medical and residential care. I looked up. The first check was mailed by the trustee on October 1st, Your Honor. It has not been cashed. I believe it is currently in the petitioner's purse. Every head in the courtroom turned. Vivian's hand moved involuntarily, the way the truth moves to the handbag in her lap. 9 weeks. 400 billable hours. Give or take. At $700 an hour, I had done the arithmetic at the defense table that morning, silently out of old habit, and the total came to nearly twice the security she was suing for. She had spent a small fortune suing her son's estate for something her son had already, quietly, permanently provided. He had never once mentioned it to her. Neither had I. Because that was the third thing Fairfax didn't know. The thing I told you I was saving. Raymond Ross took care of his mother his whole life. In writing. And asked for exactly nothing back. Not even credit. Judge Marsh dismissed every claim with prejudice. She noted, in a tone you could have used to calibrate one of our instruments, that counsel who file asset claims without running an $11 title search expose themselves to sanctions, and that the court would entertain a motion for fees. Mrs. Ross, do you intend to file? I stood. Across the aisle. My mother-in-law was looking at me small, suddenly in a way I had never seen her. An 84-year-old woman holding a purse with an uncashed check in it. No, Your Honor, I said. The petitioner is my husband's mother. This family has paid enough. The gavel came down once. It sounded, I remember thinking, exactly like the third porch step. The renewal package was signed on November 26th, 4 days inside the deadline, by the trustee of the Ross Family Trust which, per the instrument I drafted 9 years ago, is me. 40 jobs got to stay boring, which is the best thing a job can be. Earl reported it to me over the phone in numbered items, and at the end, off script, he added a 5th item. The Colonel would have enjoyed today. Ma'am, that was the closest Earl Jensen has ever come to poetry. And I should have felt like a woman who had won. Here is what I actually felt, and I've thought a long time about how to say this honestly. I felt like a woman who had finally stopped lying. Because let me tell you what those 30 years of silence really were. I called it humility. I called it protecting Raymond, keeping the peace, refusing to brag. And some of it was those things. But some of it was a lie I told a whole town. Every day, for decades, and the person that lie protected most was never Raymond. It was Vivian. My silence let her keep a story in which she had sized me up correctly at 1 teacup's glance in 1,996. Every year I stayed small. I was co-signing that story. Here's the part I'm still not sure about, and I'd rather be honest than tidy. I don't know that I was right to hide for 30 years. People will tell you my restraint was noble. Maybe. But Raymond went to his grave without ever once watching his mother look at his wife with respect, and I could have given him that. Some Thanksgiving, 20 years ago, with one sentence. I chose the peace instead. I chose it every year. Humility can be a kind of love. Hidden long enough. It can also be a kind of theft from the people who deserved to know you. The strongest thing I ever did was not the courtroom. Anyone with my file could have done the courtroom. The strongest thing I ever did was drive to Richmond 96 times and wait in the car, and the saddest thing I ever did is the same sentence. They tell you revenge is a dish best served cold. I stood in a courtroom and served it at precisely the temperature the law requires, and I can report back, it isn't a dish. It's a mirror. When it finally arrived, what I wanted wasn't her ruin. What I wanted, it turns out, was just to be seen. It took me 61 years to learn that you can't get that from winning. You can only get it from the people willing to look. Vivian came to the house 8 days later. On a Tuesday alone. No lawyer. No Diane. I watched her come up the walk, and I heard the third porch step squeak under her, that small, ridiculous sound Raymond kept for 22 years, so he'd know the second I was home, and something in my chest turned over. Because the step doesn't know the difference. It announces everyone the same. She stood on my porch with her purse held in both hands. "The check," she said, and stopped. Started again. I didn't know about any of it. The trust. The arrangement for me. He never said a word. He wouldn't, I said. He wasn't built for announcements. Her chin came up, pride as a spine. "It's the last thing to go," and then it came down again. "I have been sitting in my kitchen for a week," she said, "trying to write you a letter. I'm told you're better with paperwork than I was led to believe. From anyone else, it would have been a joke. From Vivian Ross, it was a white flag, run up in the only code she had. I did not invite her in. I want to be truthful about that. Some doors take longer than 8 days, and I have stopped pretending otherwise, and that is its own kind of health. But I had spent that same week deciding what belonged to whom, and so I said, 'Wait here,' and I went to the hall closet, and I came back with a cookie tin with 2 words on the lid. 'He wrote you every month,' I said. 'For 30 years. After you started returning them, he stopped mailing. He never stopped writing. 347. I've read 4 of them, and they were not mine to read.' She looked at the tin for a long time. Her hands, when she took it, were the hands of a very old woman, and she held it the way I once held a folded flag. 'Katherine,' she said my name like a word in a language she was starting over. 'Why would you give me this after what I—' 'Because you're his mother,' I said. 'And because he'd want you to know that door never closed.' His. Mine has a squeaky step and it takes longer. But it's a step, Vivian. Not a wall. She sat in her car in my driveway for over an hour before she drove away. I didn't watch from the window. Some things you leave a person to do in private. The card came in mid-December, with the first cold rain of the season, the same slow, gray, patient rain that fell on Arlington the morning we buried him. Heavy cream stock. The good stationery, because Vivian Ross would sooner die than apologize on flimsy paper. But it wasn't paper that stumped me on the porch, standing on the 3rd step, under a dry roof, watching the same rain come down from the other side of it. It was the envelope. Addressed, in a proud old hand that had clearly practiced the unfamiliar words. Lieutenant Colonel Katherine Ross. 30 years. It took 30 years in a courtroom, and the one person who most deserved to see it never will. That's the cost. I won't pretend it away, and I won't let it poison what's left. And holding both of those at once is, as far as I can tell, the entire job of being 61. Inside, 3 sentences. I have read as far as 1,999. I owe debts I cannot pay. V. She comes to lunch the first Sunday of the month now. We are not friends. We are 2 women who loved the same stubborn engineer, learning the same language late. The step announces her every time. I'm told that since December. Vance & Crowe runs a title search before it accepts any estate case. $11. Some educations cost considerably more. And on the last day of the year, I opened the bottom drawer and took out the green legal pad. Under 9 weeks of block capitals, I added one final line. Matter estate of Raymond Ross closed. No exhibits attached. No further action items. Some cases you win. This one, I just finished, and there is a difference. And the difference is the whole point. In the spring I drove to Arlington with a folding chair and sat with Raymond a while, among the white rows, and I finally gave him my report done first, told after, the way he liked it. She reads your letters, I told him. And she calls me by my rank now. Only took 30 years, Colonel. You always did say I was patient. Wind in the trees. Rows of stone. All the way to the horizon. Every one of them somebody's whole story. Quiet honor doesn't mean invisible, I've decided. It means you don't need to be seen until the day standing up is how you protect what someone you loved built. Then you stand all the way up. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this one. Katherine spent 30 years believing that making herself small was the same thing as keeping the peace, and it took losing Raymond to learn that the people who love you deserve the full-sized truth. So let me ask you, have you ever let your family believe a smaller version of you, just to keep the peace? And was the peace worth the price? Have you ever been dismissed by someone who never once asked who you really were? Tell me your story in the comments, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If this one landed somewhere true, type "still standing" below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.